Good afternoon and welcome to this very special session with our Finance Minister, Pranab. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been celebrating the so-called growth rate of 8.5% in the last 2 quarters. One person, I would say, who has been very closely involved and engaged and held a strong grip over our economy in the last 2 years when the globe was going through a severe recession. At CII, we have engaged with him very closely in terms of the various stimulus packages which he so quickly announced. He had a strong grip over the impetus that was required to maintain growth. Because growth gives us the resources to invest in our social sector, and of course, that further propels growth, creating a virtuous cycle, as we discussed in the morning. I know Pranab has been he's been required at many places today, but he changed all his program to be with all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our Finance Minister, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee.
Mr. Schwab, Mr. Bhatia, ladies and gentlemen, at the very outset I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the organizers for rescheduling my program as it was originally scheduled. Because of some urgent piece of business, I could not stick to that time schedule, but they were gracious enough to adjust time to suit my convenience. I deeply appreciate. I always want to share this platform whenever I have the opportunity to share some of my perceptions with the distinguished leaders of industry, trade and commerce from different parts of the country and also from abroad. And I have no doubt I learn much more than what I give. I would like to present a brief overview of the state of economy, how we are looking at it, and what we are going to do in future to meet the challenges. It gives me great pleasure to share my perception of Indian economy with you. One of the defining features of the last 2 decades has been the gradual shift in global economic power from the developed to the emerging and developing countries. The global economic and financial architecture is transforming, and the developing economies are contributing to this journey with the improving economic cloud. The global financial crisis that led to the unprecedented economic slowdown compelled us to rethink some of the basic principles of economics and finance, the functioning of the financial markets and the global economy. Leaders of the G20 countries have come together to discuss global financial instability and the resulting economic slowdown. This is a big change indeed. We are all witness to an emerging new world order where there is a higher degree of interdependence amongst nations, and hopefully there is also a more dynamic and equitable arrangement of the global prosperity. Excellencies, friends, over the last decade, India's economy has rapidly evolved since about 2003-4. With a step up in its GDP growth rate, the Indian economy has moved to a higher growth path. This has come about due to a significant improvement in our domestic investment and savings rates. There has also been considerable increase in the inflow of foreign capital. This has been important for facilitating the financial intermediation of resources to meet the growing needs for long-term and risk capital as well as technology for Indian industry. Our growth has been led substantially by the domestic aggregate demand, mainly private investment. It has averaged close to 9% in the 4-year period from 2004-5 to 2007-8. This period also saw the setting up and the implementation of prudent fiscal rules under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. This related more resources for private investments, gave a boost to the domestic capital market and business sentiments. Due to the global economic slowdown, our GDP growth declined to an average of 7% in 2008-9 and 2009-10. However, the government was quick to respond by launching a broad-based counter-cyclical policy package. It included a substantial fiscal expansion along with the liberal monetary policy support. The measures proved effective in arresting the economic slowdown and putting the economy on a path to rapid recovery. The quarterly estimates of GDP for April-June 2010 places the growth at 8.8%. The recovery is broad-based with growth in all sectors. The challenge now is to quickly revert to the high GDP growth path of 9% plus and even find the means to cross the double-digit growth barrier in the coming year 1 or 2. Our objective is to harness this growth to make the development process more inclusive, strengthen food security, improve education opportunities and health facilities both in rural and urban areas to make good of our promise of making growth more inclusive. At the same time, we are looking to address the weakness in our systems, structures, and institutions at different levels of governance. In the past 6 months, we have taken steps to strengthen the domestic macroeconomic environment. The policy focus has been on effecting a calibrated withdrawal of the stimulus imparted to the economy. There has been a determined attempt to move towards the preferred path of fiscal consolidation. We are seeking to make growth more broad-based and ensure that supply-demand imbalances are better managed. Let me take you through some of the measures that have been taken in this period. In respect of the foreign direct investment flows have been quite robust in the last 2 years, despite the general decline in the global capital flows. On our part, a number of steps have been taken to simplify the FDI regime to make it easily comprehensible to foreign investors. Since early last year, both ownership and control have been recognized as central to the FDI policy, and methodology for calculation of indirect foreign investment in Indian companies has been clearly defined. A consistent policy on downstream investment has been formulated. There has been a complete liberalization of pricing and payment of technology transfer fee, trademark, brand name, and royalty payments. As a part of the reforms in the financial sector, we in India have decided to set up an apex-level Financial Stability and Development Council with a view to strengthen and institutionalize the mechanism for maintaining financial stability. The Council would undertake macro-prudential supervision of the economy, including the functioning of the large financial conglomerates, and address inter-regulatory coordination issues. It would also focus on financial literacy and financial inclusion. We have also decided to set up a Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission to rewrite and clean up the financial sector laws and bring them in line with the requirements of the sector. In regard to the banking reforms, the banking system has come into sharper focus after the global crisis. The fact that India has not gone through any financial turbulence as a result of the earlier phase of financial deregulation is a testimony to our consistent view that reforms in global standards have to be adapted to local conditions. However, the cost of banking intermediaries in India is high and bank penetration is limited to only a few customer segments and geographies. We are trying to address these in collaboration with the Reserve Bank of India. Financial inclusion is a key determinant of sustainable and inclusive growth. We have accorded high importance to financial inclusion to cover the entire gamut of financial services pertaining to savings, credit, insurance, and transfers. To reform the taxation system, a very important part of the investment environment is the tax policy. The new direct tax code has been unveiled and efforts are also underway to reform the indirect tax regime by introducing a countrywide goods and service tax based on a consensus between the different stakeholders. These measures will create a modern and more efficient tax system in India in the very near future. The fast growth of the country in recent years has placed an increasing stress on physical infrastructure. During the 11th plan period, our government targeted a sharp increase in the infrastructure spending from around 4 to 5% of GDP to 9% of GDP in the terminal year of the plan period. I am happy to share that the actual financial spending in the first 3 years of the plan period has remained largely on course, and we have witnessed robust resource flows into infrastructure. The aspirations for the next plan period, 2012 to 2017, is even more ambitious, with the projected spending likely to double once again to around $1 trillion. The 11th plan endorsed a need for inclusive growth, which ensures equality of opportunity for all. A multi-pronged strategy has been adopted that includes rapid growth for reducing poverty, and creating employment opportunities, improving access to essential services in health and education, especially for the poor, empowerment through education and skill development, and creating employment opportunities underpinned by the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. A strategy has also been outlined for taking the green revolution to the eastern part of the country. We are acutely conscious that if our efforts have to bear fruit, we have to tackle issues of governance and service delivery. We have taken up an ambitious program of providing unique identities to the people through the Unique Identification Authority of India. Provision of identity will enhance the access of poor and marginalized to public services and enable efficient delivery of benefits. The government is striving to improve the technology environment in the country. As you know, there are no off-the-shelf solutions available to the regulatory dilemmas facing any developing country. Each country has to chart its own path on the regulatory reform road based on its native genius and the conditions on the ground. India, too, is striving to achieve the optimum path. There are several factors that have emerged from the performance of the economy in the last 12 to 18 months, which, combined with the analysis of performance over the last couple of years, augur well for Indian economy. First, the savings and investment rates have reached levels that even 10 years ago would have been dismissed as a pipe dream for India. On this important dimension, India is now completely a part of the world's fast-growing economies. Since these indicators are some of the strongest correlates of growth and do not fluctuate wildly, they speak well for India's medium-term growth prospects. It also has to be kept in mind that as the demographic dividend begins to pay off in India, with the working age group population rising disproportionately over the next 2 decades, the savings rate is likely to rise further, provided we are able to create productive employment opportunities at the required pace. Second, the arrival of India's corporation in the global market place and the sophisticated corporate culture that many of these companies exhibit lends to an optimistic prognosis for the economy in the medium to long term. In the short term, it is reasonable to expect that the economy will go back to the robust growth path of around 9% average that it was on before the global crisis slowed it down in 2008. To begin with, there has been a revival in investment and private consumption demand, though the recovery is yet to attain the pre-2008 momentum. Second, Indian exports have recorded impressive growth since November-December 2009. The favorable capital market conditions with improvement in capital flows and business sentiments are also encouraging. Finally, the manufacturing sector has been showing buoyancy reminiscence of the pre-slowdown years, though some concerns on its growth momentum have emerged in the last month or two. There is also a pickup in corporate earnings and profit margins. Today, as I stand before you, I am confident that we are in a position to sustain high economic growth in the coming decades and create a more inclusive outcome for our society. I have faith in the Indian entrepreneurial spirits, and we have the political will to do the needful to sustain this momentum. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Minister Mukherjee. We highly appreciate that despite all your obligations, particularly today, you joined us and you delivered us with a speech. You delivered a speech which clearly outlines the economic situation and the economic potential of this country, of this great country, India. But I would like to use this opportunity to welcome you all officially. It's our 26th meeting in India. It has become nearly a family affair. I just want to see who has participated more than 5 times. And Minister, I think you should also raise a hand. You see, it's a family affair. Thank you for your loyalty. I think this distinguishes very much this meeting from other meetings. And I have to tell you, Minister, listening to you, I remember when we were here the first time, or the first times, how difficult it was to go around the world and to tell business leaders you have to come to India, that's a country of the future. And I also remember when we discussed whether the growth rate will be higher than the population growth rate. And it's only a short time ago. So what has been achieved is tremendous, and I think the potential is tremendous. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of Prime Minister Odinga. As you know, he played a major role in Kenya, and we are very glad. And we are very glad and honored because your presence also expresses what is so much in the mind of many people and politicians of South-South, and in this case, particularly African-Indian cooperation. I also would like to thank our friends from the Confederation of Indian Industry for the long-standing, I would not say only cooperation, but friendship, and especially the President, Hari Bhatia, the Vice President, Mr. Muthuraman, and of course also the Director General, Mr. Banerjee. We had a fantastic cooperation, which is not only reflected in the meeting here, but which is also reflected in Davos and in many of our other activities. And speaking about Davos, the theme of Davos next year will be shared values for the new reality. So what I thought I should do at the outset of this meeting is to speak a little bit about this new reality, because we want to make sure that what we are discussing already here is not taking place in the context of old paradigms. The world has deeply changed. This crisis was not just a cyclical crisis, it was a fundamental structural crisis. And let me outline very rapidly. I know we are relatively late, we have to postpone to a certain extent our afternoon sessions, but let me rapidly outline 10 new paradigms which will determine our national policies and our business policies. The first one is deleveraging. And of course, it's an issue which, fortunately, and thanks also to your work, Minister, is not such an issue for this country. But leverage, excessive leverage, to be precise, was at the heart of the 2008 credit bubble. Leverage in some way was the steroid, the source which allowed us to achieve many things in the real economy over the last decades, but we overdid it. And now we have to pay for our sins on a global level. And let's face, those debts have not disappeared. They have been shifted from consumer debts to bank debts and now they have been shifted into government debts. But they are still here. So life around the world, particularly in the industrialized countries, will be very dominated by how we deleverage. And this will mean that we have to learn to do more with less. We must learn how to use much more efficiently our financial resources. And this was very evident, by the way, this issue of deleveraging, and Minister, you were following it at the G20 summit, and particularly in the discussion about the exit strategies and the dispute between fiscal consolidation on the one hand and stimulation of the economy on the other hand. The second paradigm shift is the rise. I would say the next generation is taking over. Let's not forget the median age in the world is 27 years old. In this country, we spoke at the luncheon about the role of youth. Let's not forget that 60 to 70% of young people have grown up in the internet age. And it's not only a technical means. I think this new generation has new attitudes, new expectations. It's much more demanding. And we have, in principle, two options. We can leverage the power of the young generation in a very positive way. And we can do fantastic things based on a young generation which is more open, which is more service-oriented, which is more global. But we can also deceive their expectations. And then we will have a deep intergenerational crisis. The third, I'm sorry if I cannot go into details, the third paradigm shift, and I actually should say the third and the fourth are connected to what is usually called the green economy. I would divide it. Green economy is, for me, too abstract. I would divide it into two new demands, particularly on business and on business models. The first one is to cope with resource scarcity. Even if the economy is growing only with 5% on a global level, it means that if we don't change our patterns in the year 2025, which is not too far ahead, we would use double as many resources as we do now. And this is just unsustainable. This leads me to the fourth paradigm shift. I think what we will see in the future is the pressure on business to integrate external costs into the business model. Because there will be this young generation demanding a greener world, a cleaner world, and governments will not have the means in a deleveraging economy to spend much money on cleaning up the world. So the way out will be to force business to integrate external costs into the internal business models. And I think those companies which are already aware of this need will be in a competitive advantage tomorrow. The fifth paradigm change, of course, is digitalization. We speak a lot about digitalization, but actually what we will see now is the digitalization of the services industry with enormous impact on health, on education, because everything which can be digitalized will be digitalized. And everything which is digitalized can be moved around from anywhere to everywhere. So this will change our social, our national patterns and our business models. And when we speak about outsourcing, let's not forget, I think the real mobility in the world will come with increased digitalization particularly in the service industry. Now, the sixth point, of course, is the power shift. We feel as if this would be something which is new. But actually, I looked a little bit in historical data, and for more than 3,000 years, China and India accounted for nearly 50% of global GDP. And it was only with the Industrial Revolution, first the UK, afterwards the US, afterwards the other industrialized countries, growing much faster and becoming the heavyweights politically and economically. So what we are seeing now is coming back to what I would say a natural situation. And actually, you can look at it from different points of view, ideologically, politically, and so on. But if you look at it socially, it's just the right thing that those countries which have the highest population have the highest economic output, because this means a much more equitable world. Now, my sixth point is the redefinition of work. If we look at the overall worldwide increase in population, the surge of the young generation, high productivity increases, we should not forget, in industry, particularly with increased competitive pressures, the relative shrinking of the financial sector, and with the transition from a more material to a much more digitalized world, I think it's clear that the traditional notion of employment, of an employer and an employee, is eroding. We just will not have sufficient jobs in the world in the traditional sector. And for this reason, it's so important to entrepreneurialize society. We spoke about education, we spoke about skills, but there's another issue. I think we also have to reorient the mind of the young people. It's not only the traditional economy, it's the social economy where they should be engaged. And for this reason, I'm so delighted that we have a strong emphasis on social entrepreneurs, people who act as entrepreneurs, but not necessarily to create economic welfare or financial welfare, but in order to create social welfare. And I just would like to ask the people, the social entrepreneurs in this room, to raise again their hands to see a special welcome to you. Because for me, you are the heroes, and you are the people who will create the jobs in the future. My next point, my eighth point, is risk exposure. If you look at the world, what's happening, I think there are three factors, three key words. Complexity. We are confronted with so many global risks. The word is togetherness. We are in an interdependent world. We at the Forum, we have done some analysis, and there are at least, as you will see in our forthcoming global risk report, there are at least 40 global risks which we have to confront. And how to deal with this complexity, which is coupled, by the way, with time compression. Because the change which we have to digest now in 10 years, probably earlier generations had to digest in 1 century. And in addition, you have the interconnectivity. All those risks are in some way interrelated. So I would argue that for nation states, but also for businesses, and particularly for businesses, risk resilience becomes a key factor. And we have seen with the case of one big oil company this year, how a small risk can nearly lead to the collapse of a well-known global enterprise. So probably we will have to devote much more attention to risk management and to the prevention and mitigation of risks. Now my ninth point is the dysfunction of globalization. We are certainly living in a global world, but we do not have the global structures. Minister, I think the G20 is a step in the right direction. But on the other hand, we have to find ways how we combine on a global level efficiency and legitimacy. I was in a discussion today, I was thinking the G20, if India would, if the central government would be formed only by the 5 major states, nobody would accept it, not the 37 states, nobody would accept it in the long run. So we have to find the right balance between the G20 and global inclusion. And finally, I would like to, as a 10th paradigm change, I would call it the amalgamation of social spheres. After the crisis and after excesses in the market system, people felt the pendulum was swinging back to state interference. But actually, what we need today is cooperation. We need a stakeholder approach. And I'm very glad that the communique of the G20 mentions that in the future, the business community will be an integral part of the G20 process. And I'm very proud, of course, that the forum will play a role in it. Now, let me come back after those 10 paradigm changes rapidly to Davos and to this notion of inclusive growth. And let me look at business theories. When we look at the future, and if we look at economic cycles, of course we are all familiar with the Schumpeter theory, but at the moment, probably we do not see a new wave of new products which would drive the economy. So the only way to keep the economy really growing is the integration of those 2 billion people who are not yet integrated into the global economic process. To integrate them as consumers, to integrate them as financial, how shall I say, people who save. So that's the only way to establish sustained growth. India has here a big chance to play a role model in this respect, Minister. And we want to showcase it in Davos. So inclusion is not just a social responsibility to lift out people from poverty. Inclusion and making sure that we include those 2 billion people on a global level, or those 320 million young people who come to the job market in India. To include them is in our own business interest, because those are the people who will drive the economy in the future. And if we look, why is this country growing or has been growing over the last 26 years since I have been connected to it, or particularly during the last 10 years, why has China been growing? Because it was through the inclusion of people who were not included before in the productive processes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy and delighted to introduce now the panel, and I would like to express a special welcome to our co-chairs. and I'm delighted that the co-chairs are old friends of the World Economic Forum. And considering the theme and context of this opening plenary, there is no person more fitting than C.K. Prahalad, a good friend also of the Forum, to whom I wish to dedicate this session. C.K. was very much engaged in the Forum. He was a pioneering thinker in the management field, exceptional in his foresight for birthing the next big ideas. He encouraged the importance of cross-disciplinary understanding and the need for never losing focus on the real problems of the world. If he were with us today, I know he would push us to question our dominant logic, our old paradigms, to improve the world through our collective contribution. His vision for marrying sustainability and global business innovation with inclusive growth couldn't be more apt for setting the stage of this meeting here, this 26th annual meeting or India Summit. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to hand the floor over to Sarah Sidner, New Delhi correspondent of CNN International. Thank you.
And give another round of applause for Honorable Minister Mr. Mukherjee and Professor Schwab. My name is Sarah Seidner. I'm the correspondent for South Asia for CNN International. Who I am, my small accomplishments are really not important today because we have some amazing people in this room, including in the audience, and I want to recognize everyone who's come here today because we're really here to plant seeds of information. It's not a competition between us. We're all working together for one goal. So give yourselves a hand for being here and participating in this session this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. Because we are running short on time, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the co-chairs. And we're going to start this discussion, and I hope you get something out of it. We've got some brilliant minds who will come up to the stage and share their experience. And we are talking about inclusive growth, a very important matter in the world that we all live in today. So with that, let's go ahead and bring up our co-chairs. We'll start with John Fredrik Baksis, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Telenor Group, Norway. Ajit Gulabchand, Chairman and Managing Director, Hindustan Construction Company, India. Ellen Coleman, Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer, DuPont, USA. Raghunath A. Mashelkar, President and Bannerakar Fellow, National Chemical Laboratory, India. Pawan Munjal, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Hero Group, India. And Dennis Nally, last but not least, Chairman, PricewaterhouseCoopers International, USA. The President of the United States visited here just a few days ago, and on his visit he said, and I'm quoting here, "India is not simply emerging, it has emerged." I think that got a great round of applause when he said it in Parliament, and there were a lot of people talking about it after they heard it. But there are many hundreds of thousands of people in this society who do not feel that they are included in that. And that is what our goal is today, not only to come up with these ideas, but to take action. So let's go ahead and start with some of the questions for our panelists. And in the In the spirit of inclusion, you will also get to answer, well, you might have to answer, you might have the answer, but you'll also get to ask a few questions yourselves. We'll get to that a little bit later. All right, the notion of this session is how can the private sector be at the forefront of India's economic development and unleash the entrepreneurial potential of the poor? All right, I'm going to start left to right just to make it easy. Let's talk about asset creation. How can companies go beyond just creating products that are affordable for those and reach the masses, and teach the masses to learn how to create wealth and sustain that wealth? We'll start with you.
Well, we're discussing inclusiveness. And in this context, when you have a country like India, when you look at prosperity, prosperity arrives at the end of development. However, during the process, you see the well-off in stark reality to the poverty that still continues. And this is the time you have a lot of people in a country that need to be included even as the process of development has not delivered total prosperity. In this context, I think the government has to play an enormous role in creating an environment in which jobs can be created, businesses can prosper to create those jobs, and therefore quickly absorb those new people that need employment into the employment process and into the economy. For doing that, they need to create education institutions and healthcare in a manner that would allow these citizens to be confident and have the skills to be successful. As far as the private sector is concerned, it needs to understand that they are expected now by society to play a role that goes beyond the purpose for which their business has been created. And this role has to be not just being a good corporate responsible citizen, but also a transformational role in making these people a part not only of giving them the employment, but a part of a society that would be able to generate the prosperity that it is seeking out to. And whilst during this period a certain amount of programs which are in the nature of soup kitchens are required, it is still this investment to create a more transformational investment in society is called for from the private sector. So they will have to work this that much little harder and more intelligently to include these extra costs and yet to be able to deliver to their consumers services at the prices that the consumers expect. So this would be the challenge that private sector faces in trying to be inclusive in the society. It is expected of them. They will have to play a transformational role, but governments will also have to help in create the environment to do that.
Mr. Baxas?
Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for being invited, and also thank you for the opportunity to present a little bit on the telecom sector's view on the question of inclusiveness. First, a couple of words on Telenor. Who are we? We are newcomers to India. That basically probably means that some of you in the room doesn't necessarily know that much about India. About Telenor. We're a telecommunication group originated in Norway, and we took our international ambitions based upon mobility, when mobility started 20 years ago. And today we rank as the number 6 mobile company in the world, and we have measured by a number of subscribers, roughly 190 million, in Scandinavia, in Central and Eastern Europe, as well as in Asia. So being new to India doesn't necessarily mean that we are new to India. We have been in Asia since 1997, and we now have more than 80 million subscribers in 5 operations. And it's this competences over the years that has brought us to India a couple of years ago. But I have to say, at a point of time where the financial crisis really gave us some headaches at the starting point of our entry to this huge and long-lasting potential market. And I also have to say that listening to the finance minister pointing to the growth potential going forward and the enthusiasm that the Indian economy is in the midst of gives me great pleasure to be here and compete for a long-standing position. On the issue of inclusiveness, let me build on three perspectives. I think Sunil Mittal basically preempted me a little bit in his initial comments, because the first perspective is really that the mobile industry itself is an inclusive making instrument. It invites everyone on board, and basically in 20 years, more than 5 billion people at the planet carries a mobile phone, which really, as Sunil said, basically is a phenomenal infrastructure to build upon going forward on many of those services that we know are taking the route of digitalization. So let that be the first perspective of this enabling platform. Here in India, there are still many to be connected, and that growth is for sure to come. Because what has happened in other countries basically is that the mobile phone is so attractive on the basic services, voice and SMS, that everyone feels they need to be connected and to take the benefits from that connection. The second perspective of inclusiveness can be that of the fact that people has become connected. When connectivity is established, the issue of how to use it, how to broaden it, and how to build new services. And it has the same feature as getting into the pockets of people in general, because suddenly there is an enabling platform there to reach out with a much broader package of services than just the voice and SMS. And again, to a certain extent, we have already touched upon some of the topics coming around, because access to information, access to education, access to health services, financial services, in its simple and initial forms, again brings inclusiveness to the people. And in that sense, there is a lot to do, but there is also a huge potential. And in many ways, and more populistically said, this industry has in a way passed its teenagers. The first 10 years, one might say that the mobile phone was seen as a luxury item for the corporate world, whereas the 10 next years has brought connectivity to all of us. Now, having went through that to a couple of decades, one can say that in the adult world, it's a question of services and how we bring them forward and how we create the partnerships with others in the digital world that really possess the ability to produce and present these services. Let me then conclude on the third perspectives. I'm coming from Norway, a pretty small country on top of Europe, minus coal, minus 10 at this time of the year, as many of you know, but still an economy that has developed very well, I should say, after the 70 odd years after the Second World War. And what are the characteristics of the societies in the Nordic regions? Does that model bring forward some characteristics that could be a stimuli for sort of developing in the development in other economies? What are the parameters that we in Scandinavia or the Nordic region, can they be defined? Is there a model? If you ask the 5 nations in the Nordic region, you will probably find different answer to that question as such. But in one area there are similarities. It's that of a democratic model. It's that of a balance between the public sector and the private sector. It's that of education to all, and it's that of rule of law and transparency. And among all, and maybe the most important one, that is that of inclusion. Because the respect of the individual position, the respect to the individual rights, and the potential of that everyone can be included is results in a high level of equality and a low level of bureaucracy and uncertainty. So maybe the check and balance that comes from these parameters is forming a key to what kind of economic model there is for a sustainable economic growth decade after decade. I very much look forward to dive into questions like this further on in also future debates. Mind you, we don't have the complete answers, but there might be some teasers that others will be interested in. Thank you.
Before we move on to Ms. Coleman, I would like to introduce to you a gentleman that you should know well by now, because last night he won the Social Entrepreneur Year Award for 2010, Rajiv Khandelwal, the co-founder of Ajivika Bureau, Udaipur. I will return back to you, Mr. Khandelwal, and go ahead and go forward with Ms. Coleman.
Great, thank you very much. And I think you'll see that many of the themes are the same in our remarks. If you think about inclusive growth, you're going to talk about innovation, you're going to talk about partnerships, and I think you're going to talk about transparency and openness are three key themes. I'll speak to one sector in particular, and that's the agriculture sector. It's a very large part of the DuPont company, represents over a third of our company. And here in India, 20% of the GDP is agriculture, yet it employs 65% or 65% of the population is involved in it. And if you think about that kind of ratio, there's something out of balance there. The Green Revolution 40 years ago made great strides in productivity in agriculture, but since then we have not kept pace. And so the first thing I'll talk about in terms of that inclusive growth is if we focus on the agricultural community, get the productivity there, get the income of farmers up, it can be an impetus to solve it'll roll through the economy and be an impetus to solve many of the issues we're talking about today. Technology is the first area that can have a large impact there. You know, whether it's hybridization, which started 40 years ago yet hasn't been completed here, or other technologies around seed and or crop protection chemicals, there's a lot that the world has to offer to increase productivity in agriculture. But that has to be partnered with the way to get those crops to market. There's still large losses between the farms and the marketplace today in India, and that's going to take other technologies as well, infrastructure development, refrigeration, the cold chain, and the like. But there is a lot technology can bring to bear to increase the productivity of agriculture and to increase then the capability of farmers to earn a living and to earn money then to be able to spend on education, consumerism, and the like. The second thing is partnerships, because new technologies tend to scare people that don't understand them. And that's where business and the private sector has to work with governments and work with NGOs to create open frameworks to really understand the technology, understand what it brings, and really create a clarity around that then allows the entire group to then make the appropriate decisions for a given country, for a given sector. And so I believe that you cannot get there alone just through technology and private investment in technology. It's going to take partnerships with government, partnerships with NGOs in order to be able to affect the deployment of the technology to really have the effect. And that in fact, comes in the openness. There's a lot of information and misinformation about what technology can do today. That is a deterrent to inclusive growth. And I think openness and transparency around the facts are really very clearly can move us in the right direction here. So that's but one example of many that I think that we could talk about inclusive growth. You can talk about the energy field. You can talk about many others as well. But I'm very optimistic around it, and I'm optimistic in India. In the years that I've worked here, I've seen almost an acceleration in momentum around the areas that we talked about, and I think that only bodes very well for the future. So with that, thank you, Sarah.
Actually, I asked you to repeat your question once and need a little more clarity on the question.
Talking about asset creation and how companies can go beyond creating products that the masses can afford and help them understand how to create wealth and long-term assets so that they can continue to help the economy grow.
I think ours is one of the companies which is very well placed to do that. I'm sure there are many others like us. The kind of products that we make, the kind of reach that we have, the kind of markets that we go to, the rural areas that we approach, the kind of customers that we acquire, I think is all about inclusive growth. Setting up our plans, whether in so-called backward areas where we include a whole lot of people into the growth economy by employing them there, the whole society around that area gets involved with our companies in many different ways. Or even if we are putting up plans, let's say in a place like Haridwar, we just went and put up a new plant in a place called Haridwar, which is a prosperous town, but with no industry. The government had given huge fiscal benefits. We of course went there for the benefits and also to include millions of people in that area. We go into areas, let's say rural areas, we go out there, we teach people how to ride bikes safely. So that's how we bring them into our customer fold, bring them into economic well-being. They start using bikes for their economic well-being, start going out to markets, especially the rural areas, from their farms to small towns. They take their produce, they take their seeds back from the towns. I think that's how we are including a whole lot of people into the economic well-being. Having said that, a lot of us companies, I think, many times consider that the CSR work that we do could also be called inclusive growth. Many times it is not, because we are sometimes just about giving corporate welfare. More important thing is to bring these people into the economic ladder. We go out and help ladies around the villages, around our plants, teach them how to make jams, pickles. But what do they do with that? I think they need to get connected with the markets. That's where our role comes in. We go out, teach ladies to tailor and embroider, but then we need to connect them to the market. Sometimes we ourselves buy their producers as uniforms for our employees, etc., etc. We all go out, set up schools in all these areas. What's the point of having a school if you don't have teachers coming into these schools? You need to go the extra mile, the last mile, to actually reach economic benefit to all these people.
Mr. Nally?
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. You know, as I step back and reflect a little bit on the last several years, the financial crisis, what we've all been through, it demonstrates one key thing to me, and that is how connected we really have become across the globe. And that connectivity goes not just to the economic environment that we're all dealing with, it goes to the capital markets, it goes to how central banks work, it goes to how regulators work, how investors think about the opportunities across the globe. And I guess I was struck by Professor Schwab's comments about these mega trends for the foreseeable future. And who knows, what is the time period that it's going to take for these trends to evolve. But the one common theme to me that is really worthy of good discussion is I don't think any one government, any one company, any one part of the world can deal with those kinds of issues. It really demonstrates how interconnected we really have become. And therefore, if we're really looking for real solutions to these challenges and these issues, it's going to be clear that as a collective group, we're going to have to learn to work together and work together to solve these kinds of issues in a very open and a very transparent way. And to me, the core ingredient that's going to be necessary to really deal with those issues is one fundamental word that we use a lot that is, I think, a challenge for all of us, and that is trust. If we are going to be able to solve these problems, working together with governments, working together with industry, working together with consumers, working together with regulators, we're going to have a degree of trust and cooperation that we've never seen before. And to me, that is a fundamental issue that I think is going to be at the forefront of many of our discussions here over the next several days. I, for one, am very encouraged by where India is in its position in the global markets. It's not without challenges, but as I look at the agenda for the next several days, it has all of the right issues being discussed and debated, and I, for one, look forward to really participating in those discussions and hopefully coming up with concrete suggestions and recommendations for how to take them forward. So, thank you.
Mr. Mashalkar.
Yes. Well, to start with, thank you very much, Professor Schwab, for making this as a C.K. Prahalad memorial session. C.K. was a very close friend, and I still remember 16 April, sitting here in Planning Commission for a meeting, I got an SMS, C.K. is no more. Frankly, I can't believe a word without C.K. I still can't believe it. He was a fantastic thought leader. I think India has lost a great son, a great thought leader. He gave us so many things, co-creation, N equal to 1, R equal to G, wealth at the bottom of the pyramid, innovation sandbags, I mean, a whole range of things. So he will live with us, and I'm delighted that we have this particular session. It so happens that he wrote his last paper with me in Harvard Business Review. It is this paper, Innovation's Holy Grail, which appeared in July, August. So let me respond to your question by talking about the theme that we have developed on inclusive growth, inclusive innovation, and the way to go about it in this particular paper, because that will be my way to pay tribute to this great man. But to do so, I have to get back to 25 April 2008, when I was in Australia, and the Australian Academy had done me the honor of getting me elected as a foreign fellow. And they asked me to speak on innovation, and I was just looking at their members list and found that I was the first Indian in 40 years that they had honored. And I said, how come? There are so many people who are much better than me, and they must know enough about India. So I said, I'll give a talk which was called as Indian Innovation from Gandhi to Gandhian Engineering. And they were surprised by the word Gandhian Engineering, and I explained to them what Gandhian Engineering is all about. I said, what do engineers do? They get more from less. Like the mainframe computer used to occupy the size of this room, and today we carry 100,000 times more power in our pocket. That's what engineers do. And getting more from less for more, I said, is something that is always a strategy on competition in terms of enterprises. Getting more from less for more profit, for more value to the shareholder. I said, at the same time, can we get more from less for more people? those 2 billion people that you talked about, Professor Schwab. And then I gave some examples, and that theme was developed. And here was CK coming from the other end, wealth at the bottom of the pyramid, because he was telling us that there are 4 billion people whose income levels are less than $2 a day. So what can we do? And I was coming from this end, getting more from less for more, and how do you go about it? By doing product innovation, business process innovation. And one of the things that I was developing was the following. I said, let us say there is an HIV/AIDS patient, and there is a ARV, antiretroviral treatment, for $10,000. You cannot say that because you are poor, I will give you 10% concession, 10% discount. It cannot be 100%. That $10,000 has to be brought down to $100. So we are not talking about, when you talk about affordable, it has to be extremely affordable. When you are talking about lower cost, it has to be ultra low cost. And therefore, Professor Schwab, the innovation cannot be incremental innovation, it has to be disruptive innovation. And that's what you will see India has been doing over a period of time. Pre-1991, we had to do that because the kind of restraints and constraints that we had, we got liberalized on 24 July 1991. In fact, I suggested somewhere that we should celebrate that as our second Freedom Day, by the way, because our first freedom was political freedom, which was given on 15 August 1947. Because on that day, we opened up our minds, but constraints were always there, and industrial enterprises always did innovation in terms of constraints of resource, constraints that we had ourselves put on ourselves, in terms of rules, regulations, and so on and so forth. And those constraints and aspiration is a deadly trigger for innovation. That is where we started doing more from less for more, and more people we had to, because we had to serve a country of 1 billion. And therefore, when you see the emergence of a nano, it comes from the constraint of a resource that a two-wheeler holder has in terms of his purchasing power, and that is where Ratan Tata looks at him, Ratan Tata looks at a family which is getting drenched in the rain with an infant being held by the mother, and he says, this is not on. How can I create, let us say, a car for him? And that's how nano comes, and there's a new spirit of nano. Now people talk about not just nano car. Since you talked about affordability, people talk about nano refrigerator, the Chotu Cool of Godrej, priced at $69, and whole range of sort of other things. So there is a new spirit that has come. So I think the fundamental point that we want to make is getting more from less for more is not just for philanthropy. It is not just social corporate responsibility. It makes enormous business sense. Enormous business sense because these emerging economies that are growing, just look at India. In 30 years' time, we are talking about the envelope of $4 GDP per capita to $20 GDP per capita, 725 million people, basically, all right? And for the first time, that number will exceed the number which is less than $4 GDP per capita. By 2040, we are talking about 1 billion middle class. So as we move from 300 million to 1 billion middle class, you can see poor are going to become lower middle class, and lower middle class are going to become middle class. And they have to be served with these products. I will call them MLM products, all right, for want of a better word. And then you can talk about a ginger hotel, which is $20, or a $30 cataract operation, a $2,000 car, or a $35 computer, and so on and so forth. And mind you, it is not getting less for less. It is getting more from less. Like Hari said a little earlier, when you talk about Arvind Eye Care, cataract surgeries, $3,000 being brought down to $30, you would say, oh my God, the costs are 100 times lower. It must be awful. The quality must be 100 times worse. Sorry, no. You compare that with Royal College of Ophthalmic Surgeons, the different parameters, and you will find it beats it by a factor of 2 to 4. So it is getting more from less, not less from less, by workflow innovations, by improving, let us say, by using inspiration from McDonald's, assembly line operations, and changing workflows, and so on and so forth. So I think, in short, what I want to say is that this MLM paradigm, getting more from less for more people, is not good only for India. It's good for the world, and it's good for everyone. And let me explain that to you. In fact, in the case, since we are talking about nano, I remember rich people are buying nano now. Our problem has been rich people are buying nano. On the other day, one of my rich friends came in a nano. And I said, why? I don't see you in your Mercedes. They said, no, I'm very comfortable in nano. Whereas we had developed it for the two-wheeler holders, so as to say. All right? How do we reach them? So you create more from less for more for people who should have those affordable products, and you see the others buying it. So it becomes an interesting challenge in marketing because these people don't go to showrooms. Showrooms have to come to them, and it becomes an innovation all the way. But the central point is, if you create a quality product, it is not just the poor who will buy it, the rich will buy it. But if you create product for the rich, the poor cannot buy it, basically. So I think looking at the whole world, looking at the challenges that you talked about, global economic meltdown, you talked about getting more from less, climate change, you have to get more from less for more. I think there is only one paradigm. And the last point I would like to make is that if it makes a great business sense, then what kind of MLM CEOs, if I may call it, we should have? I think first and the foremost is that we always talk about innovation, we always talk about passion in the belly. I think we have to talk about compassion in the heart, so as to say. I think that's extremely important. You talked about creating access, creating an opportunity, including the excluded. I would have been excluded from this panel, by the way, if I didn't have a chance to study. I was born in a very poor family. I walked barefoot until I was 12. I studied under street lights. I was about to leave my school, and I got 60 rupees per month from Sir Dorab Tata Trust Scholarship for 6 months. That is how I'm able to study. That is why I'm able to occupy this position. Why? Because there was not only just innovation and passion, there was a compassion in the heart of Tatas. How do we create that? I think that's the first. I think the second important thing that these MLM CEOs must have is that they must think of the unserved customers. And rather than asking a question, given our cost structure, which segment will we serve? They have to ask a question, given need to serve the unserved, what cost structure can I have? Just the reverse question, by the way. We have to start making a paradigm shift. The third is there must be an ambition. That means the boardroom discussions must be not just what is our next mission on the moon, but what is our next nano project, so as to say. The third is that we should not be asking what if we change the way we operate and reduce our cost structure or return on capital employment, not just operational margin, but what if we change the cost? How many more people we can include, and what explosive growth we can have if we make things affordable? And finally, a paradigm shift in terms of the way we look at consumers as people, suppliers as partners, and employers as innovators. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think these are the points that I and CK have made, as a matter of fact, in our Harvard Business Review paper. So ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude that doing MLM is not philanthropy, it's not just social corporate responsibility, it can change the world, it makes also a great business sense, and the opportunities are now to make a better world, because at the end of the day, it is not just doing well, but doing good at the same time. It's not just creating value for money, which we are looking at for all the time, but also creating value for many, and when I say many, not millions, billions of have-nots. Thank you.
Mr. Mashelkar. Mr. Khandelwal, your answer.
Thank you. Sarad, I would also take this opportunity to briefly introduce my organization, which would typically not be represented in a forum like this. I come from Ajivika Bureau, which is based in Udaipur in South Rajasthan. And it's an agency, it's a public service organization that provides services and solutions to migrant workers, to people who are coming out of villages and entering urban areas, urban economies, mostly at the very bottom end, large numbers of young people who are running out of options in the villages and therefore joining the labor markets in cities. This is not a small number. Actually, an official estimate doesn't even exist. And some good guesses today put the figure at over 100 million people who are actually migrants, who are seasonal migrants, who constitute the largest number, the largest proportion of our workforce. In fact, migration is the way labor is recruited in our country. From rural areas, basically the urban labor is from rural areas. Why is it happening? Obviously, there is some exhaustion of resources. In the villages, agriculture is running out of viability, of productivity in many parts. Employment options have not grown as was expected, and growth and development has got concentrated in urban areas. My organization provides services to help people make this shift from rural to urban more sensibly, and with more skills, with more information, with more clarity of the choices that lie ahead of them. The problem is that our own workforce is in a very it operates in a very adverse environment. Most of our workers fall in the unorganized sector. They are informal workers. 92% of our workforce is informal. Therefore, it is not necessarily covered by legislation, by contracts, by documentation, by social security, by stability of tenure, and all of that. However, for them, there is no other option but to join this. So, on one hand, as the economy is growing, as the business is doing so well, there is also increasing casualization of labor, increasing informalization of this vast workforce that is coming into cities and joining our industry, fueling our industry, and taking it forward. The point is, I'm thinking about the inclusion imperative. What is the inclusion imperative today? And I will be presumptuous enough to say this in a forum like this, as a person from a civil society organization facing a group of business leaders and policymakers. The inclusion imperative for business is to help find a dignified space for this vast number that is coming out from our villages into urban areas and working at the very bottom end of our economy. These are people without who our businesses and our industry will not do very well. But what is the situation? They are coming in without identity. They are coming in largely without skills because our education system is not actually making people employable. It is just giving them a certain standard of education and then pushing them out into the labor market at very young ages. From where I come, the average age of first entry in the labor market is 14 years. What kind of skill would a 14-year-old boy have in the labor market, and how much further would he go if he were to stay there? They're coming in without protection, without legal protection, without a framework of services that can help them last longer in cities. Now, it's not a phenomena that we can prevent or reverse today. I think that phase is gone. We are in a situation of almost irreversible shift from rural to urban. And this shift can be in the interest of the economy if it is managed and assisted sensibly and fairly. And in that, I think business and industry has a lot to contribute. We currently are we have no framework. We don't have a policy framework that can help rural to urban migration, that can look at it as an opportunity, that can protect workers' rights, that can help people move up the value chain with more skills, with more opportunities. We don't have financial services or instruments that can help workers open bank accounts, get insurance, get a pension product, get access to small loans, because they are dispersed. They are everywhere in the economy. My sense is that as this shift happens, it has to be invested in very purposefully, and more models are needed that will help vast numbers to make this transformation from rural to urban better and more competently. My own organization does it in a small way. We give ID cards, we do vocational training, we help people with jobs, we do financial services, help people get bank accounts, help with pension, insurance, help with legal aid, help with, the whole host of things that can make migration experience more dignified and more humane for this very large number. The number is large indeed. It's not just Rajasthan where migration is a reality, it is all over North India. And there are pockets of poverty in South India as well, where out-migration is a big reality, and it needs to be addressed as a feature of economic and policy growth. Thank you.
Now I'm going to give you a bit of a taste of what it's like to be on this side of the camera and have to do things quickly. So we have 1 minute for each of you to answer the following question. There's no prize at the end, I'm sorry. The question is, if you could pick out two of the biggest hurdles, and we're going to go India specific here, that India has to either remove or just knock down to make inclusion possible, what would those two hurdles be? And we'll go ahead and start at the end with Mr. Gulabchand.
I think we got to concentrate on seriously educating our people. We have universal education policy. We have all kinds of things in place, but we haven't really made primary education compulsory. We haven't opened out education adequately so that it is available to one and all. And I think this is probably the biggest hurdle to inclusiveness. And if you want me to say the second one, it would again be education.
Nice answer. Mr. Baksas.
That was less than a minute.
So you have more time.
Yeah, I'm impressed. And in particular, when you preempted sort of the main topic here, namely that of education. But let's elaborate a little bit further. Coming from then the industry that I do, I think a level playing field, transparent framework on the industry is something that creates a competitive arena between the players in the marketplace, and that will again drive penetration. And with the fabulous enabling potential of things going digital over the networks, I think access for everyone to the networks has the potential of bringing exactly the highly needed educational dimension to everyone into actually all homes. All homes being, of course, an exaggeration where we stand today, but the potential is there at least to reach out to many more than the present penetration proves in India.
Well, I would certainly think of skills and employability as a major area of investment in rural, especially in rural India, among rural youth, at the threshold of migration, and social security and protection for our workforce, which fuels the economy in a very substantial way.
Well, I already mentioned food security, agricultural productivity, as in my opening remarks, and I would include that as one of my two. I think the other one I would include is energy security. If you think about the amount of energy, I've heard a number of 280 gigawatts needs to be installed in the next 10 years just to keep up, and India's not where it needs to be today in energy, and you think about renewables being less than 10% of that. And if you think about if you had a reliable energy supply, what it could do to people who now don't have it, who are disconnected and marginalized, and the enabling that would do around just so much, because having access to energy is just a tremendous step up in terms of many other aspects of life. I would add energy security as my second.
The finance minister talked about governance. I think governance at various levels across the nation is extremely important. I'd like to club governance and a good, well-heeled distribution system of gas-bearing growth to various levels. If you look at the example of Maoism today in India, it's a chicken and egg situation there. Because there's no governance, there's no development. And the Maoists believe because there's no development, so they're going out and doing what they're doing. And the other one I would like to re-emphasize on skill development, which is, I think, a key for development of the nation.
I would certainly echo the thoughts around education and skill development. That would be my number one. But again, picking up on this whole issue of how different individuals are going to work together in a collaborative way, building this trust, I think a focus on increased transparency, accountability, that gives all of the various constituents to dealing with these issues, I think would be my second item.
I would say, again, education and skill, but generalize it to, I would say, talent, technology, and trust. How do we bring these three elements together? A talented educational workforce backed up by technology, plus the trust that you talked about. Combination of these three, not in isolation. And the second, I think I will again like to pay tribute to CK while I'm ending. CK always used to say that it's an unwise fancy to think that India will become developed first and then become non-corrupt. No. You have to become non-corrupt first and then you will become developed. I think weeding out of corruption is extremely important because the transaction costs on reaching the poor, including them, are so high. And that is why hats off to Nandan Nilekani, hats off to UID. I think it is one of the greatest ideas that was born. I wish him all success because that will be fundamentally important in reaching to the poor. I think let's take that as a given.
Okay. I would like you guys to all thank our wonderful panel here today who took time out of their schedules to come and share these ideas with you.